Welcome, everyone. Thank you for participating in my session, Healing from the Legacy of Slavery. I am your presenter, Sharon Leslie Morgan. I am the founder of ourblack.ancestry.com. Our American legacy has to do with two huge historical harms. America was founded on Native genocide and African slavery. We suffer the consequences today. These events provided the foundational wealth for the entire Western world, engendered racism, produced systems of inequality, and informs implicit bias against others. I view genealogy as a tool for healing because I believe that healing begins where the wound was made. We need to honor our ancestors, the ones who made you, you. We need to reclaim memories, experiences, and relationships. We need to find the lost people who were separated during slavery, find linked descendants, find living relations, explore the historical context, and most of all, once we find them, say their names. We have to start with how to do the research so that you can go back into the past and understand how that legacy affects you. Were your ancestors enslaved? If your ancestors were born in southern states prior to 1870, they were likely enslaved. In 1860, 394,000 people held 4 million people in bondage. 4 million enslaved people were emancipated after the Civil War, and only 10%, 400,000 people of the black population were free. The other side of the equation is, were your ancestors slaveholders? If your ancestors owned land too big for one family to work, they were likely slaveholders. 1 in 70 people were slaveholders. Most were Scots-Irish. The average slaveholding was 10 people. 80% of white males did not own slaves, and owners of 200 or more slaves were less than 1% of the population, but held 20 to 30% of all slaves. Your basic tool for being able to delve into this history is family tree software. It is essential to keep track of information and documents. What you must do on this journey is to build trees for both the slaveholders and the enslaved. My favorite tree software is Roots Magic. There are others, so you just choose the one that you want. Your research sources are both online and in person. Online, you have FamilySearch and Google, which are free. You have subscription services like ancestry.com and Our Black Ancestry, and there's a big difference in how much those two cost. And then in person, you have state archives, county courthouses, libraries, historical societies, cemeteries, graveyards. There are lots of resources there. The tip is that you must do old-fashioned paper research. The internet does not give you everything. When you search the online sources, you miss a lot if you don't dig deeper. The research process for enslaved people, you begin at the ancestral home place. You find your ancestor in the 1870 census. You track their descendants on censuses from 1870 to 1940. Then you try to back that up with documentation, mostly birth, marriage, and death records. And then do a community study so you identify people who are related by blood or affinity of slavery. For slaveholders, same kind of program. You begin at the ancestral home place. You find the ancestor in that location. You track their migration and their slaveholding from 1790 to 1860. There was a huge migration of people from the eastern United States into the deep southern states. So that's why you have to track the migration. You find their censuses, There's slave schedules, wills, probate files, and deeds. And you look at associated people like their wives and relatives who could also have been slaveholders. The tip is check online family trees for matches. Once you do your research, there are so many people online now that you may easily find someone who is related. And then you check Intellius, which is the service that I use to find living people. Census records are the primary source for most genealogists. The first census taken in America was in 1790. It was required by law. All censuses show numbers of enslaved people. No names, but it will at least give you information to be able to track how extensive your family slaveholding might have been. Enslaved African Americans were documented as chattel, which equals property, rather than people. In 1870, the first census to record African Americans with surnames was issued. There are also 1866 Civil War Southern state censuses that list names but without surnames. In 1880, many people moved or changed names. By 1920, many people relocated during the Great Migration. The 1940 census became available in 2012. The 1950 census will be available in 2022. Tip: all censuses are available at FamilySearch.org. Surnames. This is important to know. Enslaved people did not have public surnames before 1870. Related family members often took different names after emancipation, and many people changed their names between 1870 to 1880. It is estimated that only 15% of African Americans took the surnames of their last owner. Many of them chose other names: a previous owner, the first owner, someone they admired, a skill they possessed, an aspiration. Some people just merely made up a name that they liked. So the tip is do line by line census reads. Don't just take the first thing that pops up on Ancestry. Look for family groups, look at neighbors, check neighboring counties. Find the slaveholder. Once you find your ancestor in 1870, you need to find who is the likely slaveholder. So there is something called the Nettie rule. If you do a line-by-line read of the 1870 census in the home community, you look for people with the surname you're interested in. From when you find your ancestor, from that name, go 10 up, 10 households up, and 10 households back. If you find a white person with that surname, they are likely the last slaveholder. Then you have to go on and search the white family to prove the connection. And you prove that connection through wills, deeds, court cases, insurance records, personal papers, Freedmen's records, all kinds of other material that will help you. The tip is that the technique works in reverse. You can find the slaveholder and then search 10 up, 10 back, and find black people with the same surname in close proximity. Slave schedules. Most people don't know that these exist. These augmented the census schedules. So every federal census from 1790 to 1860 documented slave holdings, but there were separate slave schedules that were produced in 1850 and 1860. You should note that there are entries for slave houses, and that may indicate family groups. All the slave schedules are available at FamilySearch.org, but you have to call them up individually because you won't get them automatically if you just do a general search. Deeds. Deeds are really important because deeds recorded transactions of land, property, and people. And this one is very profound for me because this is a wedding gift from one of my ancestors. Her father gave her slaves as a wedding gift in 1833. That picture does not illustrate someone who is related to me, But this is one of the ways that slaves were transferred. And so you have to look at deed books in the courthouse because they are not online that may be able to shed light on this. Probate records. These are huge. Enslaved people were often bequeathed in wills, mortgaged, or sold to satisfy debts. This is an example on the right of my family, where the patriarch of the family died and he passed on more than 100 people to his sons. The tip is that probate files are available at FamilySearch, and county courthouses maintain the original estate files, including the inventories and the distribution reports. So you gotta go and do the in-person research. Personal papers. There's a lot of information that can be found there. One great resource is the tip, the Index to Records of Antebellum Southern Plantations by Jean L. Cooper, which lists the names and broken down into locations, plantation names, where you can find repositories that keep records of people who were slaveholders. The Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was established in 1865. It was supposed to make things better for people who had been emancipated from slavery. Many formerly enslaved people worked as sharecroppers for their former masters, and they signed agreements. So you will find these agreements. And the tip is that these are available at FamilySearch.org. These are very helpful. Newspapers. Black people generally didn't make the news unless they did something really awful. So this particular clip is a grand uncle of mine who committed suicide in Iowa. But you will find community news, obituaries, fugitive slave ads, Find My People ads. The second clip is a clip from Thomas Jefferson, the one who was the president, who was looking for a runaway slave. The source for digitized images from historic newspapers is at this website, Chronicling America. DNA testing. People have jumped on that bandwagon, which is an amazing scientific thing, but it is very misunderstood. So the best sources you have are Ancestry.com, Family Tree DNA, and you need to know who to test because it is not necessary to test everybody. You want people who will solve your puzzle. So 10% of enslaved people were recorded in 1870 as mulatto. In those cases, you have to look for descendants of the white fathers, and you want to match their DNA. A really good book that describes the process is The Social Life of DNA, Race, Reparations, and Reconciliation After the Genome by Alondra Nelson. There are 3 types of testing. There's Y-DNA, which is male, man, 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 man. mtDNA, which is female, woman, 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 woman. And then there's AtDNA, which is the most popular and the cheapest. But it is also the one that delivers so many results that it's really hard to keep up with. So you have to choose what you want. The AtDNA, which I said, is cheapest. The others are more expensive, but if you're really trying to solve a problem, you may need to really look into those. What we have to do in order to heal from the legacy of slavery is that we're really interested in changing the paradigm. The way that that is going to happen is that we have to acknowledge the truth of the past. We have to use that knowledge to heal yourself and inform a better future for all of us. We need to have a society where we're building relationships that are built on equality and respect. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that one day the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit together at the table of brotherhood." That is how the healing will come from genealogy. because we have to research the past. We really have to confront the truth, and we really have to make a conscious effort to make things different. And that is the end of my presentation. And I thank you very much for your participation.